Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts, with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm your host, American Haunt Historian, Alan Searcy. And if this is your first time here, I'm glad you found the show. And if you've been listening for a while, I appreciate you coming back. Before we get started, go ahead and hit the subscribe or follow us wherever you're listening. Leave a review if you can, and share the show with someone who enjoys true crime or ghost stories or just the weird, wild stuff I talk about. That's how this thing keeps going. You can find us on Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook, Instagram, and if you got questions or stories you want me to cover, send them in. I'll start answering some questions here on a future episode in a couple weeks. Well, today, we're heading to Louisville, Kentucky. Literally. I'll be there this weekend for a Louisville Horror Con. It's at the Kentucky Expo Center. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to do an episode on Louisville. I'm actually going to do one on Friday on Louisville as well. And I do have a book on the Derby City. Southern Ghost Stories Louisville. It's been out for a few years now. In Louisville, it's a place that's seen its fair share of history. Some of it impressive, some of it violent, and some of it's still unexplained. So today we're talking about the old Galt House. It's a hotel that started as one of the most luxurious destinations in the country, but quickly became tied to bloodshed, chaos, and one of the most shocking murders of the Civil War era. The Galt House was built in 1833, right as Louisville was booming. The Ohio River was a major artery for trade. Steamboats were constantly moving through, and the city was growing fast. Dr. William Galt saw an opportunity and decided to build something that matched the energy of the city. A high-end hotel that would cater to wealthy travelers, businessmen, and politicians who were passing through. When it opened, it immediately became the place to stay in town. People with money stayed there. Influential figures stayed there. Even Charles Dickens stayed there and wrote about how impressed he was, comparing it to the kind of accommodations you'd find in Europe. That tells you everything you need to know about how nice this place was. But places like that tend to attract more than just well-behaved guests. It didn't take long for the Galt House developed a darker reputation. In December 1838, just a few years after the Galt House had opened, 3 men from Mississippi arrived in Louisville ahead of a wedding. One of them was Judge Edward Wilkinson, a well-to-do man from Natchez. He was traveling with his brother Dr. Ben William Wilkinson and their friend John Murdaugh. The trip was supposed to be quite simple, just pick up a few things in the city, enjoy themselves for a couple of days, and then head to Bardstown for the wedding. At some point during their stay, Dr. Ben Wilkinson needed a proper outfit for the occasion, so the 3 men made their way to a tailor shop owned by a man named Dr. John Redding. At first, everything was routine. Ben ordered a coat, a vest, and a pair of slacks. But when he tried the coat on, something wasn't right. It didn't fit the way he wanted. Now Redding, he tried to keep his customer happy. He offered to fix it and asked them to come back the next day. When they returned, things got sideways. Ben tried the coat on again, and Judge Wilkinson immediately criticized it, saying it didn't fit properly and just didn't look right. Now Redding apologized, but that wasn't enough. Ben began arguing with him, and then Judge Wilkinson stepped in and made a comment about not wanting to argue with a man of, quote-unquote, his profession. That was a spark. Redding took that as an insult, and the situation escalated fast. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and suddenly, Judge Wilkinson grabbed an iron poker near the fireplace and began hitting Redding with it. It wasn't a scuffle. It was a beating. The only reason it didn't end right there is because people from the street heard the noise and rushed inside to break it up. The fight was over, but the tension wasn't. As the three Mississippians left the shop, John Murdaugh made sure to send a message. He pulled out a Bowie knife and flashed it at the battered tailor before heading back to the Galt House. It was a warning, and it didn't sit well with Redding or the people around him. A couple of hours later, John Redding wasn't alone. He went to the Galt House with his brother-in-law, John Rothwell, and two other local men, Adam Meeks and William Holmes. They were there to identify the man involved and swear out a warrant. But when they stepped inside the hotel bar, they didn't just find information. They found the men themselves. And just like that, everything started back up again. Redding and Judge Wilkinson immediately began arguing, picking up right where they had left off. The tension in the room built fast, and this time it wasn't just words. Wilkinson, still arrogant and dismissive, warned Redding to back off, going so far as to threaten to kill him if he didn't stop interfering. Redding stepped away, but the situation had already gone too far. Adam Meeks turned his attention to John Murdaugh, calling him out for playing with the knife earlier. The two men went back and forth, trading insults, until Meeks finally snapped and struck Murdaugh across the body with the cowhide whip. And that was when the moment just everything exploded. Murdaugh reacted instantly. He drew his Bowie knife and drove it into Meeks' abdomen. The wound was catastrophic. Meeks staggered back. His body gave out almost immediately. He collapsed in a pool of blood there on the floor. At the same time, Dr. Ben Wilkinson lunged at John Redding, trying to grab him, but before he could get to him, John Rothwell jumped onto Ben's back and started fighting him off. Seeing his brother in trouble, Judge Wilkinson rushed in and stabbed Rothwell twice, once in the back and once in the ribs. The second wound pierced his lung. Rothwell collapsed, gasping for air, unable to breathe as the room descended into chaos. Within seconds, the Galt House bar had turned into a bloody crime scene. Two men lay dying on the floor. Adam Meeks was already gone. John Rothwell was not far behind. And the men responsible? They fled. Later, they would be arrested. They would stand trial. And despite the brutality of what happened in that room, despite multiple witnesses, despite two bodies on the floor, they would be acquitted. The jury deliberated for 3 minutes. 3 minutes to decide the outcome of a double homicide inside of one of the most prominent hotels in the country. And just like that, the men from Mississippi walked free. So right from the beginning, the Galt House had blood on its floors and a reputation that was starting to shift. But that wasn't the incident that people will still talk about today. That came during the Civil War. By 1862, the country was in deep conflict, and Louisville, Kentucky was a key location. Military leaders were moving in and out, using places like the Galt House as headquarters. That's when General William Bull Nelson enters the story. And everything you read about him paints the same picture. He was a massive man. They called him Bull. He was over 6 feet tall, weighing around 300 pounds, with a temper to match his size. He was loud, aggressive, and known for humiliating his own men. He didn't just correct mistakes. He tore people down publicly. There's even an account of him finding soldiers playing a simple game while on duty and reacting so violently that he threatened to shoot one of them on the spot. And that kind of behavior builds resentment. It doesn't matter what rank you are. If you treat people like that long enough, eventually someone is going to push back. And that's where we get to Brigadier General Jefferson C. Davis, not the Confederate president. This is a Union officer. He's the opposite of Nelson physically. He's smaller, quieter, but just as strong-willed. And he doesn't respect Bull Nelson at all. In fact, he sees him as a failure, especially after a disastrous defeat that Nelson had overseen. The two men already didn't get along. And when Davis was ordered to report to Nelson, things started to go downhill really, really fast. At one point, Nelson questioned Davis about recruiting efforts, and Davis essentially brushed him off, refusing to give him a clear answer. And that alone was enough to set Bull Nelson off. The argument escalated quickly, with both men cursing at each other, and Nelson, he eventually stripped Davis of his command and ordered him out of Louisville. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. A few days later, due to a shift in command, Davis was sent right back to Louisville. And when he returned, he wasn't alone. He brought the governor of Indiana with him, a man who also had issues with Nelson. That's important because now Davis, he has an audience. Now there's pride involved. And that's where everything kind of comes together. Inside the Galt House, the lobby was filled with officers, politicians, and civilians moving through the building. Jefferson Davis spotted Nelson near the front desk and decided to confront him. He walked up to him, right there in front of everyone, and demanded an apology for how he had been treated. Bull Nelson laughed, completely dismissed him, told him to go away like he wasn't even worth acknowledging. But Davis didn't back down. He asked again. This time, he was a little more forceful. And Nelson didn't just ignore him. He started belittling him, talking down to him in front of the governor, in front of everyone. And that's when Davis lost control. He crumpled a piece of paper in his hand, and he threw it in Nelson's face. It wasn't a physical attack, but it was a direct challenge. Nelson responded instantly. He struck Davis across the face with an open hand. And in that moment, everything changed. That wasn't just an argument anymore. That was public humiliation. Davis didn't swing back. He didn't escalate right there. Instead, he turned and walked away. But he wasn't calming down. He was making a decision. He went to find a pistol. He borrowed one from a friend, and then came back into the hotel looking for Nelson. Now think about that for a second. This isn't a heat-of-the-moment reaction anymore. There's intent. There's time to think. Time to cool off. Instead of letting it go, Davis chose to come back with a weapon. He found Nelson near the doorway of his office. No shouting, no warning. He raised the pistol and fired. The shot hit Nelson in the chest, right in the heart. And even then, the massive general didn't drop immediately. This huge man turned and staggered, bleeding heavily, trying to move. He made it to the stairs and actually climbed them step by step as blood poured from the wound. You can imagine the scene, people frozen, others rushing around, nobody quite understanding what exactly they're seeing. By the time he reached the second floor, Nelson collapsed. Soldiers rushed to him, dragging his body into a nearby room and placing him on a mattress. Everyone in that room knew what was happening. Nelson was dying. And in those final moments, he asked for a preacher. Someone was sent running, and a local minister arrived and baptized him right there on the floor of that room in the Galt House. As he faded, one of his soldiers asked him, "Hey, are you all right?" Nelson's reply, "I am murdered." A few minutes later, Bull Nelson was gone. What makes this even more unbelievable is what happened next. Jefferson C. Davis, he didn't run. He didn't try to escape. He stayed right there and surrendered. And despite the fact that he just shot a superior officer in cold blood, he was never properly punished. There were discussions, there were talks of trials, even a grand jury indictment. But the war was ongoing, and experienced soldiers like Davis, they were needed. So instead of being executed or imprisoned, Davis was sent back into the field. That was his consequence. Well, a few years later, In 1865, the Galt House burned to the ground. A fire broke out in the early morning hours and spread quickly through the building. Despite efforts to evacuate everyone, not all made it out. Bodies were recovered from the ruins, and some were so badly burned they were barely identifiable. There were even reports of looting in the aftermath, people taking advantage of the chaos to steal what they could. So now you have a place tied to violence, tied to sudden death, tied to tragedy. And that's where the stories start. Today, the original Galt House isn't standing. There's another newer Galt House built a few blocks away. But the original footprint, that location is still quite active. There's businesses, restaurants, apartments. People are still there, working late into the night. And they'll tell you things happen. Objects move when no one's around. Chairs just fall over. Items disappear and then show up somewhere completely different, another part of the building. Employees hear footsteps in empty rooms. Some have even reported smelling cigar smoke when there's no one present. And then there's the story of Elizabeth. According to local Louisville lore, she was supposedly a chambermaid who started working at the hotel just days before the fire, and she was never accounted for after the blaze. Some believe she died there in the fire that night, overlooked in the chaos. People claim to see a woman, sometimes even a child, moving through the building late at night. Maybe it's imagination. Maybe it's coincidence. Or maybe, with everything that happened there, something never really left. So that's the story of the Galt House. And if you want to learn more about the haunted history of the Derby City, check out my book, Southern Ghost Stories, Louisville. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be in Louisville this weekend for Louisville HorrorCon at the Kentucky Expo Center. Linda Blair, Skeet Ulrich, Ed Begley Jr. There's a ton of celebrities. It's going to be a really good time. It's very affordable. There's going to be a cosplay contest. There's panels. I'll be there signing books, telling stories. It's going to be a real good time. And for more information, you go to LouisvilleHorrorCon.com. Also, while you're there, go find my buddy Ben from Monster City Madhouse. And if you don't go, you can always go to MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Check out his new shirts. Really cool, old school, retro, horror/Halloween t-shirt designs. My favorite's Lagoon Life. It's the creature from the Dark Lagoon grilling out with his family. Really fun. Yeah, but MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Be sure you go check out all the stuff. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe. Follow the show. Leave a review. It helps more than you think. Share it with somebody who'd be into this kind of story. And again, you can find Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook or Instagram. As I mentioned earlier, send me your questions. I plan on doing a Q&A in a few more weeks. And just go to Facebook, find Southern Ghost Stories, send us a message, ask me about a haunted place in your neck of the woods or just whatever you want to ask about. If you got a story, share them with me. I had somebody send me some pictures today from a haunted site in Tennessee. Actually, 2 cemeteries. They'd taken some pictures and gotten some really weird, wild stuff. So, yeah, send me your questions, and I'll start answering them on the show. And I'll see you guys again on Friday. See you then. Check out the exclusive shirts from Monster City Madhouse, Gravestone, Rocktober, and Val Halloween. All that and much more at MonsterCityMadhouse.com.